5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome to another literary reading courtesy of the Alaska Quarterly Review and the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen. We decided to extend our 40th anniversary benefit series because it's so inspiring to hear AQR contributors read their work and chat a bit. You can find the recordings of previous programs at our website, aqreview.org, and our YouTube channel. Today we have 3 women poets, Michelle Brittan Rosado, Amber Flora Thomas, and one of us, Alaskan Marie Tozier. Welcome, I'm Heather Lendy, the Alaska State Writer Laureate, and on behalf of the Center for Narrative and Lyric Arts, thank you for being here today. Gunishish, as we say where I am, here on the banks of the cold and windy Chilkat River down in Haines or Dayshu, Alaska, the homelands of the Tlingit, Chilkat Kwan, and Chilkoot Kwan since time immemorial. While this reading is free, like all literary journals, AQR could use your support. So please consider making a donation to this series so we can continue to publish writers like the ones you're going to hear today. Now I'd like to introduce Ron Spatz, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Alaska Quarterly Review. Ron's a professor of English at the University of Alaska and a former National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, and the recipient of 2 Alaska Governor's Awards and a Contribution to Literacy Award from the Alaska Center for the Book. Under Ron's 40 years plus of leadership and vision, Alaska Quarterly Review has created strong connections between our state and the larger literary community, and it's also been influential, as you'll hear today, in supporting new and emerging writers, as well as presenting works that include a rigorous questioning of larger societal issues. And it's also one of the few places that publishes long forms, such as novellas. Ron?
Okay, thank you, Heather. Welcome, everyone. As Heather said, this event is being recorded and will be available on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel, so tell your friends about it. Before we begin, I have a few acknowledgements that are important. I also want to, on behalf of Alaska Quarterly Review, thank the museum, Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center, for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and Web 907 for its web support of Alaska Quarterly. Also need to thank the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to thank our friends at the 49 Writers for providing information about this series within their organization. Finally, I want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous land on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land. Land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of Indigenous people and marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. And now to begin, Heather Lendy will introduce today's featured poets. Heather was recently selected as Alaska State Writer Laureate. She is the author of 4 books of nonfiction, all published by Algonquin. If you lived here, I'd know your name. Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs, Find the Good, and her most recent book, Of Bears and Ballads. So now, back over to you, Heather.
Thanks, Ron. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce all 3 of our poets today, and then we'll begin with Michelle, the last one that I introduce, and move on from there. It's really my pleasure to introduce all of them, especially Marie Tozier. Marie is an Inupiaq poet who lives in Nome, Alaska, and the author of Open the Dark. Her poems have appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review, Yellow Medicine Review, and Catamaran Literary Reader, Cirque, and more. And I didn't mean any offense to the other poets when I said it's a particular pleasure, but it's nice to have an Alaskan here. So That's what I meant. Marie has devoted much of her life to passing down traditional skills and ways of knowing. She can sew, knit, quilt, and show you how to butcher a seal. Her poems spring from the tundra, from rural life, and from family life. She and her husband have, I think, 7 children. Lyric essayist Karina Cook says that Open the Dark is, quote, full of the rhythms of the seasons and family and ancient narratives, but it's also about the open wound of residential school history. In Tozier's poems, in her poem, They Tried to Teach Me History, Marie pushes back against systemic attempts to obliterate all things native, making room for grief and for a world where there is enough for everyone. Marie is also an instructor at the University of Alaska and has taught traditional crafts and skills and writing. During her low residency MFA at the University of Alaska Anchorage, she focused on identity and poetry. As a staff member at UAF, she took part in the Robert Wood Johnson Global Solutions Partnership, which allowed her to visit New Zealand and learn about Maori education and culture. And Marie appeared on an episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in October 2000. She was the first Alaskan contestant to make it past the fastest finger question and to play in the hot seat. Amber Flora Thomas is the author of Eye of Water Poems, which was selected by Harriet Mullen as the winner of the 2004 Cave Canem Poetry Prize. Her other books include The Rabbits Could Sing Poems and Red Channel in the Rupture Poems, published by 2 publishing houses close to here, the University of Alaska Press and Red Hen Press, which is associated with some Alaskans. Her poetry has appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review, the New England Review, Tin House, Echo Tone, Callahoo, Orion, Saranac Review, and Third Coast, as well as Angles of Ascent, a Norton anthology of contemporary African-American poetry, and lots of other journals and anthologies. She's received many fellowships from Yadu, Atlantic Center for the Arts, Breadloaf Writers Conference in Vermont, Suwannee Writers Conference. She earned an MFA at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. She is an associate professor of creative writing at East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina, and she was born and raised in Northern California. Amber Flora, who says, I look for opportunities in poems where collision happens between different places and times, where all the resulting selves can coexist. Michelle Brittan Rosado is the author of Why Can't It Be Tenderness, which won the Felix Pollak Prize in Poetry and Theory on Falling into a Reef, which won the inaugural Rick Campbell Chapbook Prize. Her poems, too, have been published in the Alaska Quarterly Review, Poet Lore, The New Yorker, and the anthology Ink Knows No Borders, Poems of the Immigrant and Refugee Experience. She has received awards and fellowships from lots of places, too, the Academy of American Poets, Community of Writers, Sustainable Arts Foundation, and the Vermont Studio Center. She holds an MFA in creative writing from California State University at Fresno, and a PhD in literature and creative writing from the University of Southern California. She currently lives in Long Beach and teaches writing at USC. Michelle Brittan Rosado, who says, quote, poetry for me has been a celebration of the in-between, which is where tenderness can be found too. Tender, she says, has its roots in the Latin word tendre, to stretch, hold forth. When she began writing poems, she says she encountered the space of the page like it was a physical place, an endless belt of green, something beyond the window I could almost touch. Poetry, she says, has since carried me through uncertainty and knitted together what is broken apart. Adding, how merciful that language, land, and water have the ability to carry us when we have left what we know but have not yet arrived to where we are going. How merciful that language, land, and water have the ability to carry us when we have left what we know, but have not yet arrived to where we're going. Michelle?
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And it's so great to be in this virtual space with you all. Thank you. I'm going to start with the poems that I had published in the Alaska Quarterly Review. I have my issue here with me. This was summer and fall 2017. And the first poem of the two that were in here are about the in-between and growing up in the small-ish Northern California town of Vacaville, small by California standards, but probably not elsewhere. And I wrote about that space. The poem is called Pastoral with Restless Searchlight. And the epigraph tells us it's in Vacaville, California. I was raised with the ocean over my right shoulder and the jagged mountains filling my left hand with teeth, while overhead, the military jets drew their temporary scars. In this valley, I rocked myself like a marble at the bottom of a bowl. Then I gathered my skirt of drought, of failing plants. When I slept, the crop dusters laid down their thin quilt, and my life shortened, though barely. I counted my luck amongst the deer drawn down the hill by the prison's lights. I wanted to be like the dried grass alighting suddenly on a summer afternoon, a fire started by nothing but sun, a helicopter's oracle foretelling the blackened acre, like a hole cut into fabric behind which always breathes the tangible dark. I wanted to be like that, to swallow fences, to listen for the animals crossing over, the night's highway crowded with the footsteps of the anonymous. The other poem that I had published here in AQR was, it's interesting to look back on it because it was a timely poem of witness titled Poem to My Unborn Son, the morning after the election. Because this had come out in 2017, it was reflecting on the 2016 presidential election. And I've been thinking about since last year's 2020 election about how things have shifted in that time. And also if I were to rewrite this poem, what else would I say? But so that's the context that this poem was written in. And again, it's Poem to My Unborn Son, the morning after the election. Since November began, the painters have been here, stirring their mixtures, preparing for the days ahead, laying down the dark canvas around the grass perimeter outside. First, they papered the windows so that in here, when I wake, I can't be sure my eyes are fully open. In the partial light, I make my way through the familiar interior, now suddenly made strange. I count the steps to the kitchen, am careful in passing through doorways, slip my body down the hall without touching anything. I think your life thus far must be like this, all subtle movements in the semi-dark, my skin half illuminated by day, then a shade pulled down at night. I read that this is the week your body takes on pigment, the blood red burrowing beneath fat, beneath skin, becoming closer to the color you will learn to wear in a world that will have to decide whether to love you or fear you for it. This is the truth about where we are as the men work outside, the ladders against our walls like sudden thunder. We ready ourselves to be altered completely. That poem I saved for my current manuscript that I'm working on, and I thought I would read a couple poems from that and then end with a couple poems from my book, Why Can't It Be Tenderness? So from the, I guess I'll start with Why Can't It Be Tenderness? The poem that opens this book is called Ode to the Double L, and it was written after a poem by Araceli Sturmay, who wrote Ode to the Little R for the rolled R in her first name. And I took that as a poem prompt for myself, and thinking about what it means to be named Michelle, and always having to say with 2 L's, you know, at Starbucks and other places, and how feeling my whole life that the 2 L's were very important, that they had significance. And a lot of what I write about in this book has to do with being mixed race, and being white, and also Malaysian. And so the 2 L's kind of become a metaphor for that in this poem. Twin shorelines at the end of my name, traffickers of white space. You could last on the tongue forever, lolling, longing, an endless drawing out of the little stream between you. Fill my life. I drink from the narrowest canal flowing between 2 countries that half of the time claim me. Double L, bring me back to the in-between, where my breath has always lived without containment, like 2 legs pointing toward the ocean, or these arms reaching into sky. From birth, you have doubled my grief and my wonder, shown me the parallel which can never touch, the way I run alongside my love without entering his true mind. Rivulet of secrets, slim as a eucalyptus leaf, airplane runway of the heart. Double L, let my days always move in 2 directions. Build me a channel into which I can pour this voice. I have another poem in here, kind of about doubling or splitting. It's titled Customs, as in the customs in an airport, and it's about a child going between both parents, going through customs after a long trip, coming back to the US. Customs. At the airport, after a long journey, a mother and father divide like a cell, foreign and domestic, into their respective lines for citizens and non-citizens. The child is small enough to run beneath the rope that skims the top of her skull, splitting her family into parallel routes to the same house. The girl passes from line to line beneath the gaze of the customs officer. No one has caught her yet, going back and forth. She swings like a spider between 2 points, building something nearly invisible. Go to the other side with your father, says the mother. As tall as suitcases, boxes at eye level, the girl becomes a piece of luggage in transit. She has nothing to be confiscated. She doesn't even hold her own passport. The adults slide it across the appropriate counter for an off-center stamp on an unmarked page. Already, she no longer resembles the child's photo, iridescent and cross-hatched by the advanced security features covering her face. Even her name has an expiration date, when someday she is married and will change it. For now, the child belongs to no one and no country. Everything is impermanent. Her loyalties might shift according to a game she makes of jumping over the dark tiles in the airport floor. I'll end with this poem that for now is the title poem of the manuscript I'm working on, which is The Last Sign of the Zodiac. And if you're not familiar with astrology, the last sign is Pisces, which are 2 fish swimming in opposite directions. So kind of in line with the themes I like to obsess over and write about. And so that's kind of the image that I'm working with in this poem too. The last sign of the Zodiac. Slipping beneath the surface, I can hear my pulse sounding its beat. A shortwave sonar tracing the perimeter of the tub I can fit into if I bend my knees. It sounds like the heavy revolutions of twin engines on a plane, and I rise as if above the border between two countries where I am an outsider and I am floating above them, unattached. The bath is as hot as I can stand. I place as much distance as I can between myself and the cold that is inevitable, biting at the margin between air and water. When did it happen? My aversion to freeze. At 2 years old, an only child then and forever, I ran into an icy lake in early spring, the winter still draping the landscape with its net of cold. I didn't care for the picnic being set at the edge of land, for the adult world, the human arrangements of halved sandwiches and apple slices. Already, I was teaching myself how to be lonely, that it did not matter what I left behind, so long as I inhabited a body capable of adapting to this element, of feeling untethered from the world. I stepped out into it without gravity or thought, followed my one instinct. But it was not like the pictures of blonde children laughing on the box containing the raft we filled in the backyard with a garden hose. I was not drifting downstream. Mine was a vessel in reverse, choked with water instead of buoyant in it. From inside the boat, I watched the sky, which convincingly moved its clouds so that I could pretend I was going somewhere other than the section of concrete where I was anchored and could be watched from a kitchen window above the sink of dishes. This was in my father's San Francisco and his father's and his and his. I could not tell if it was mine, more mine than my mother's, who arrived over water, though without entering it, from Borneo, which I'd learned was an island. And I felt like that, though I was not of it, or I was half, and I would have to decide was enough. I felt gray as the fog rolling over me, indistinct, the seagulls making their trajectories based on either hunger or sleep. When I was born, they had to cut me out. I was a fish curled in a bucket. And when I was lifted out, I arched in the foreign air, and I would keep opening my mouth for the rest of my life. Each time I wade into the Pacific, I imagine myself touching the land where the other half of my family lives, though I do not know whether it is power I receive or send out, or if it will ever return to me, though I know it is water that laces everything together. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. That was beautiful. And now we have Amber Flora, I think. Or no, do we do Marie
Yes.
next? Oh, sorry. So we're doing
Yeah.
Marie next, or Amber.
No, it's Amber Flora.
Okay, I get a little confused about the order, but all of you could just interchange it and we'd be fine. So thank you, Amber Flora.
All right, thank you. So I am going to read new work, and I figured that it would be helpful in doing the reading to read thematic. Like, I'm working on a very long book; it feels very long, and so I figured I would read poems that have to do with leaving, and return, and changing one's mind. So I don't have a title for this new manuscript yet, but I'm getting close to settling on one. I don't feel rushed right now. And I'm hoping I'm not muted and everything looks good. Okay. So I'll start with this poem, and they're more narrative works, so hopefully it's not hard to follow, but they are a little long. So this is A Brief History of Leaving. We use words like terraform and reincarnation. We throw rocks into the forest to spook the horses. Our names are You Can't Catch Me and I can outrun the night. We press so hard with our compasses that we go through the paper, gouging the wood desk. The pivot is a mystery to the finger that follows the cut later. Then you split, and when you return, you teach me the correct way to nail a wood fence for bad weather is kissing a girl against the picket until someone's lips are chapped. Yesterday, I found our initials in a bench at the end of Main Street in Mendocino and caught up with you, someone I've loved since 1983. I told you about my pink house in a small North Carolina town, the 2 or 3 places I've lived since, and then I leave you again. When we go, we exit, we cut and run, we fly like a holler in a canyon, disappearing like spit in a palm. When a forest becomes a cleared road, the swimming hole shallows with silt and the houses go up one, then another. I drive through whenever I can and think about the pollywogs abandoning my reach. I don't believe in Mars. I believe in extinctions. As we say goodbye to the last male northern white rhinoceros on a reserve in Kenya, the keeper crouches beside the carcass, hand to temple horn. The falling down place of losses pushes off again. National Geographic open in my lap. I'm at 40,000 feet, tearing open a complimentary bag of pretzels. I suckle rock salt from the slick crisp and dip my tongue in the holes before I bite down. I'm going somewhere. I'm making tracks. I don't go home. I phone to tell you how it is out here, making off with the last memories of how we were back then, and still searching for some private place to quit the day and get gone. Hours later, I stop when I see an old barn punched with darkness in a soybean field. And it ends up being true again, how suffering being ours alone. You tell me about the fires burning in the West. I describe the topographies at the end of hurricane season, when the big trucks come in to scoop up mountains of belongings, coils launching from ruined couches and box springs, warped records shedding their sleeves, hills of pink and cream insulation. Do you remember, I say, when throwing rocks in the forest was refusal? The end is a long way off, you say. Now that I've escaped, I'm leaving again. Leaving Los Angeles. And part of the work that I'm doing in this manuscript is I travel a lot, and so I'm writing about different places that I've either lived or that I've visited or that I've spent valuable time. So this is Leaving Los Angeles. Fleeting piano plays The Rain in Green by Shirley Horn. I try to find myself in this song she offers as pittance, the bit about it not being easy. I'll leave at 3 a.m. for LAX in my red rental car, so I fight not to disappoint with pebbles twisting in my voice. Sometime later, I turn my face into sleep, smelling her warm in the pillow. Later still, I roll to the alarm, quiet as I reach toward the lamp. A hook rug textures my toes. I rise to bones, to a bed sighing. I dress for the plane. For the last time, I'll finger that love with hope, lacing hard through a dull ache to palm cold water to my face. Colgate drags into spit. The basin gleams with nightlight. Suitcase by the door, can I pour myself down her bark with one more croak? The city blinks in a crack between the curtains. I touch her shoulder quick and bend a kiss to her cheek. I'm leaving. She turns herself open with warm morning rushes out of sleep, lashes unfolded. I burn every step to the car, thinking I can go back. Even as I put my suitcase in the trunk, as I turn the key in the ignition, even as fog clears the windshield and 4 coyotes trot through the street, red and gold feathered beasts smelling the light down a hill. A neon passage that, if I did not look with care, might have seemed right. Then I imagine myself arriving at the airport, the plane leaving the ground, that starting toward hope again. All right. And I, as I was working on these poems, for some reason I needed these, I needed to find a space where I could do sort of longer journeys, but in shorter sort of chunks. And so this is another brief history. So this is a brief history of smallness. Like a thumb pressing into a shoulder blade, like the red speckled carapace of a ladybug who died and dusted in the camper window, his shell wedded to a finger before I blew a wish. Displeasures reorientate to a vastness bound by touch, the rights of which claim me, as evidenced by a study which shows molecular change. When you chant love at water, atoms dance in response. Words vibrate under the pressure of a thumb. I fold the photo in the car's visor when I hit the road for a year-long worm. A national park 1 week, the body of a black bear bloating on a county road the next week. No one says my body is your body. Then I make it to the oldest living tree and breathe the atoms that have been circling through sunlight and water since way back before my body. And I know my flesh is a proclamation to touch. I feel your thumb in there with watery plumpness and tight muscle, a road surging in my dreams. Sunlight says sunlight, dust says dust, reaffirmations of work we do around touch where purpose supposes agency, and I see my body as surrender. I don't flinch at the campsite when lessons expand, a diamondback and a king snake fighting to the death in the shade among the rocks during a summer that burns my breath to ash, their lengths nodding. Your touch directs me into disguises, keeping you safe. Smallness begins as gold fleck, and it shimmers with your presence. Selfhood is stage direction, the hard smiling, the bean cake, all fist and waiting. You say smile, and I do this in my molecule. I'm having trouble talking tonight. In my molecules, atoms dancing in flame, firing neurons, silver blade glinting as it tips and falls along my spine. I have your chin. The harder I smile, the more I look like I'm cutting you out of my face. To your monument, I chant love, oh love, to proclaim surrender as you press a thumb into my shoulder blade, a seemingly small touch. And then I'll read 2 more. And this is a palinode, which is, it's palinode for a poet. And this is basically a sort of retraction of an ode, which is another way that I'm kind of returning in these poems in this series. And so I've been kind of going back over earlier work that I wish I could take back. So this is a response to a poem from my first book, and I am taking it back. So this is palinode for a poet, and it's in response to a poem. The title in my first book, Eye of Water, is Lake Shore Deer. The weapon against meaningless on that Sunday morning was the deer jaw, aiming its gape out of the lakeshore rot. And I liked you enough to break the hinge by the ear and crack the hard with my shoe, putting the stink in your hand where you turned it, the teeth loose in a green stain. I imagined your mantle between the antique ink bottles and eyeless compass. I knew you were anxious and plain, a head of thinning hair that you dyed red, your glasses thick enough to set your eyes back into near quiet searching while you frowned satisfaction that a poem might come from this. Nothing had happened to you in your life. The anxiety about nothing flexed its lackluster song about a deer's death. I flashed on the bones of my dog shot dead in a sheep farmer's field a decade before. I had that jaw, those teeth caught in my throat when I heard the rattle in your fist. Your long skirt tickled the grasses up the path. I picked a briar from the hymn. We found an owl feather, acorns, quartz stone for a bowl of rocks you were building from your travels. I chewed the inside of my cheek with pity I couldn't write just yet. Afterwards, I didn't have to do anything as you pressed your wetness against my thigh, and I lay back watching you fight some meaning out of this too, your grin and head arcing moan. I wiped at the island of sweat running between your breasts. You scalded me for being desperate when I wanted something more from you. Before you left for good, it wasn't love, it was kindness. And then I'll end with this poem, Loggerhead, which happened to me this past spring. I was out at on Ocracoke Island with a friend, and we were down at the South Point, and there was a massive loggerhead sea turtle marooned on shore, and I spent hours waiting for the rangers with a small group of people trying to protect the sea turtle, hoping that it could be saved. So this is that story. I stand guard over the loggerhead at the shore, so gulls won't pick out her eyes. Dust draws shadow lines through the waves. I don't know, but it seems like she is staring toward the dunes. Out of silence, the grass gently moves. I am here, and there is nothing to do but wait and appreciate the barnacles crusting her shell and pink algae fanning like a skirt on her side. I tell her story to late arrivals and become one of her keepers for now. You think you know the ocean until a loggerhead sea turtle washes onto shore, injured and listless. Then you know the depths you've been avoiding, the nights you swam down so far in a dream you woke up gasping, it was just a dream, only a dream. We call for rescue, and then I put my hand on her neck, the skin speckled yellow and thick as is needed for diving into deep ocean. The head lifts, but her fins allow the waves push to shore and pull back to sea, her nearly 200 pounds marooned in the sand. In the hours I stand there watching over her exhaustion, I make out an aerial of Nebraska farms carved in her shell, like I'm 40,000 feet over the earth, and green has gradations into yellow side by side and cut into acreage. Days later, I learn I'm just another angler lost who has lost her line. The rescuers cut her carcass open to find a hook tangled in her gut. I put my hand on her leather in the dream and rush at the darkness, rising to hundreds of blackbirds who erupt from the pines outside my window the next morning, and then nothing and silence. She is still breathing just then. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you very much, Amber. And now Marie, it's your turn.
Thank you. I think it's always so interesting for me to try to put together a reading list. And I'm always hoping, I hope everything flowed really well. So tonight I'm going to start with a poem that is in the latest edition of AQR. It's a little bit different from the poems that are in my book, Open the Dark. It's called Namesake Triptych, and it's about my Puerto Rican family. Namesake Triptych. 1. Grandmother wore a cotton dress. Nellie and I watched her shuffle to the door. Before introductions, she kissed me, held my hands in her wrinkled ones, led us through her tiny home. Our room was clean. The large window had a thick screen, and the double-handled pane was raised high. On the wall, a portrait, my baby picture. All those years ago, black-haired, a blue dress and white shoes, smiling. Did she recognize me? What did she think of my parents' divorce? Her grandchildren growing up in Alaska? That night, a huntsman spider trapped herself in the window screen, full of eggs, ugly. The sound of her legs on metal grate filled the night, made our room too small to sleep in. 2. A different life. I met my grandmother, Maria, in Puerto Rico. She was a tiny lady with deep brown skin and wrinkled hands. She spoke quickly and only in Spanish. I called her Bajita, like Poppy did. She made me popsicles of fresh piña juice and real coconut. She washed my laundry by hand on a scrub board, which embarrassed me. Not the board, but the idea that she had to do it. I realized then what a different life I would have led, a Puerto Rican instead of an Eskimo. 3. You have your father's eyes. I'll never forget the look on Poppy's face when I showed him the brown smudges nestled at the bottom of my foil-wrapped Rice Krispies treat. Tiny roaches, I imagined. He wasn't sure. Before he blinked, I saw the truth. He smiled, showed me his dimple. Chocolate, he said. And then I'd like to read a couple of smaller poems from the book Open the Dark. The first one is called A Quack Shrek. And when I've read this before, I don't think that I've let people know what a quack shrek means. And it means old woman. And I aspire to be an old Native woman who doesn't care what she says any longer. So that's sort of what's behind this poem, A Quack Shrek. One spring, sandhill cranes flew into sight. Having landed, they became hard to spot, their bodies and wings dirt brown, the color of dead willow leaves. That fall, the crane wife fed her husband cranberries. He balked. He made fun of the tiny morsel. At night, while he slept, she dressed his eyes in red berry pulp, staining him for life. And the next poem is a poem, quite a few of my poems I wrote to remember people in my family that have passed on. And so this poem I wrote for my mom. It's called Confection. All the health books say sugar feeds the cancer. My mother returned to me in a dream, her frail lace of lashes, the sweet medicinal mother smell of her lip dew, her smile. I don't know if anyone will remember that she loved short ribs, salad with ginger sauce, baklava. Baklava so decadent, I refused to make it while she lay in her bed, unable to garner an appetite. I didn't bake it until her fight was gone. The sweet no longer a temptation. Like a child with a tiny treasure, she bragged on her gooey, honey-smothered pastry to Millie, her home nurse. She stashed bits of delight away in the freezer. And then I have a couple of short poems that I consider my political poems. And this is one that I really like. And this is actually one that Heather read a couple of weeks ago at a state meeting. That was really exciting for me. So this one is called For the Newly Elected School Board Member from Anywhere But Here. Welcome to the ancestral land of my people. We already know you. Bossy white woman thinks she owns the world, rules the school, wags her finger in our face, preaches love if only we'd listen. And then the longest poem in this book, I wasn't going to read it tonight, but I thought about it a little bit, and it makes, the last poem that I'm going to read is something that I just wrote, and it makes more sense if we have the background of this poem called They Tried to Teach Me History. They tried to teach me history. The parents of these Indian children are ignorant and know nothing of the value of education. John S. Ward, U.S. Indian Agent, 1886. The beginning, first steps, declaring what is, naming it, Ugruk, bearded seal. Parents, defenders, teach a child by example, by witness. Grandfather said, when a young man comes of age, he must learn to hunt. Of, the Bible says, and Jesse begat David the king, and aren't we all the sons of Adam, each one? These, right here, as if it was happening today. Wait, the school teacher stands up at City Hall, begs for money to do her job, then blames the parents when she fails. Indian, Alaska Native, Hopi, Dene, Inuk, the real people. Children, not vessels. We fill them up, not understanding what's useless can't be poured out. They're drowning. Are is better than were. My brother was lost and now he's gone. Ignorant. Ignorance, another word for why can't you do it my way? Less the guilt. And what follows after dismissal is grief, disaster, destruction. Brown faces on the street, middle of winter, waiting for bars to open. No, the difference between life and death is the difference between the truth and a lie. You can't take it back. Not today, not tomorrow, forever. Nothing. Everything taken away. Our land, our ways, our children, gone. Abandoned Kujki, sod house, returning to earth. Of, tell it to your children, and let your children tell it to their children, and their children to the next generation. Remember. The, definite, specified by circumstance, unneeding of recognition or approval or equivocation. I am. Value. What is the fair price of happiness? Can it even be measured? Unacknowledged injustices are wounds left unhealed, left to fester, warm to the touch. Of songs unsung hang in the air, No ears remain to claim them, make them listen. Education. Would it matter if I laid out the process for cutting seal, splitting the carcass, separating the blubber from the meat, which is dried in the wind and sun, butterflied open from tail to neck, meat hung till black, backbone hacked, intestines braided, to be cleaned, water run through them, water to wash away the sin of being. And then I have another short poem, which I don't read a lot. So I thought, okay, well, tonight I'm going to read this poem. It's called Pride. Pride, Front Street, Nome, Alaska. A drunk young man stands at the corner, hugging his new girlfriends. Suddenly he throws his middle fingers into the air and yells after the police car, "Ha, ha, yeah." And then this is my second to the last poem. And this is another poem that appeared in AQR. Okay, and this one is called Approaching Winter. A lone gull makes its way across an expanse of silt, stinking of molluckchucks and rotting willows, loose feathers, and one discarded sock, which clings to the anchor line of a dogged fisherman's net. An abandoned snow machine, sunk last spring, sits exposed near the far shore. The gull is white and mottled gray, ambling on pink legs, long pale yellow beak raised in the air, a debutante, unsure of how to hike her ruffled gown. And then this last poem, the City of Nome Museum reached out and said that they were preparing an oral history of COVID experiences of people in our region. And this is my submission. And this is a brand new poem, so bear with me. It's called Kini Loa Taktuna Ellipsi Ninun. My grandfather shared a story from his youth. As a boy, he lived in a sod house with his parents, siblings, and his grandmother. He grew up wearing cotton pants and sealskin mucklucks. His cloudy eyes would wander as he recalled falling from his bunk one night. He swears that his life was saved by his mother, Nellie, and her love. My mama nursed me, he said. She stayed at his side and fed him broth. He would tell us many times that a soup made from boiled ptarmigan could nurse anyone to health. I wonder what he would make of COVID. What would a man who grew up without his natural first language, silenced by the intimidation of not succeeding, what would he think of today's mask mandate? Of a cloth that covers up who you are, a mask that makes us all the same, takes us from individual to homogenized mass, strips us of our natural first instincts to make contact, to smile. I suppose as a people known for nonverbal communication, it might be easier. Inupiaq, using our eyes to assert humanity. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Marie, and thank all of you. How we have a few minutes, and I was thinking, even listening to you about the line that Michelle said that I quoted at the beginning. I keep thinking about that. How merciful that language, land, and water have the ability to carry us when we have left what we know, but have not yet arrived at where we're going. And I know it sounds, it's sort of a big thought, but all of you focus on kind of going somewhere or coming from somewhere, and leaning on language and land, water, places. And I'm wondering if that's something that you want to comment on. If you don't want to, if you'd rather talk about something else, that's okay too. But I'd love to hear the three of you sort of engage with that a little bit. What do you think? Maybe Michelle could go first, since that was sort of the thing that you said, not to put you on the spot.
Sure. No, thank you for reminding me. I think that came from an interview that I had published somewhat recently, and even when I think I was like sharing that response, I wasn't even sure 100% what I was meaning by that. But it's funny, like it is a theme in my work of being in between. And I remembered early in the pandemic, when everything was kind of uncertain and we didn't know how long this would all last. And a friend had, a colleague had taught my work and had shared with her class and asked if I could be a guest over Zoom. And it felt so surreal, like how do I read this work that was pre-pandemic and like now? And then I was looking at all these faces on the screen, which was still very novel at the time. And then as I was reading the work, I was like, we're all kind of in this in-between space collectively. And so I was worried that the work wouldn't feel relevant. And then I'm realizing this is kind of a space that I feel is kind of eerily familiar in a way, like even as it's strange. So I don't know, that's something that I've been processing a lot lately. Like I think a lot of creatives is just, how do we make sense and meaning out of the current times? And so I've been just kind of sitting with that also. I'd love to hear what my fellow poets here are thinking about in terms of this time. I haven't been doing much writing, to be honest, like during these last, 18 months, almost 2 years or so. A lot to process. I'm sure the poems will come later, but for me, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about this idea of limbo, of like constantly being in this place of leaving, of always leaving, because that's been my MO. I've gone, I've lived in a lot of places, and it feels like I'm running from something, and now things are sort of shifting with the pandemic. I suddenly slowed down, like a lot of us, and started to realize like how much, like being a university professor, which I love my job, but they work me, it feels like they're working me to death. I never have a moment to just come up for air. So I came up for air just by the nature of working from home and not having to get in my car and drive to the campus, and being able to, in between my classes, take these sort of breaks. So it just literally transformed my energies to just be able to sort of like stop and ask myself, what am I doing? What do I want? What is my intention with the teaching and with the writing? And so I've been thinking a lot about that, but I don't really have a good answer. But I do think that, we are thinking as a culture about migration. This is really like core to everything that that is happening around the world right now. So, so it just seems like everything kind of goes back to exile, migration, being forced out. So anyway, those are some of the things I'm thinking about, but I don't actually have a good answer right now.
One thing that I just wanted to mention quickly was each of our the way that we use language, like each of us are from completely different places, but with language, we're able to share where we're coming from. And when Amber Flora was reading one of her poems about the jawbone, and she talked about the stink of it, I was like, that's what molluskchucks are. They're stinky fish. And it was neat that, you know, as writers from different places, we can connect with each other through our use of language. So that's really neat. Thank you.
Marie, what about the idea of, you know, being in one place or another or two different places? Because it's interesting that your AQR poems coming up in the latest edition are about as far away from the Marie Tozier of your other poetry that you can get. I mean, Nome to Puerto Rico are
right. And that was something I think in one of the other readers also had a sense of duality in their work. And that's just yeah, it is.
Michelle does from two different places. And I listened to the ocean, you know, going to Borneo from San Francisco. And I thought going down the coast from, well, and over from, you know, Nome to Puerto Rico. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I think, yeah, it's tapping into, like Amber Flora said, because of COVID and because we're spending all of this time, you know, isolated, you are really able to get into like remembering something that you wanted to write about. And it has been hard for me also. I'm not writing very much. And so when I do write something, I get very excited. But now the tricky part is going to be finding a place for the writing. And I was just really lucky that I had been in communication with Ron about the Puerto Rican poems, because they were poems that I had written quite a while ago, along with the poems that are in Open the Dark, and they didn't fit into the book. And so that's a kind of interesting thing. Sometimes your work is so, you know, it's so different that how do you find the right place for it? And I don't have an answer for that. I'm still wondering what that is.
Wow. Well, it's about 4 minutes past the hour. So it's probably time to say goodbye. It's just been wonderful hearing all three of you, and you complement each other so well, and it all fit together. And as Marie said, much more eloquently than I could, you know, that it's the language, it's the poetry that connects us, and that comes from things that move our hearts. And it's so interesting how similar the three of you are from completely different backgrounds. But so thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us today for AQR's 2021-22 literary series. And on behalf of the Center for Narrative and Lyric Arts, the nonprofit sort of fundraising arm of Alaska Quarterly Review, all our gratitude for the generosity of today's writers, Michelle, Amber Flora, Marie. Support them by ordering their poems from your local bookseller. And also thank you to Cody Carver and the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center who produced this program. And again, if you enjoyed this program and you enjoy reading AQR and being introduced to the many thought-provoking, enlightening, and inspiring pieces that are in it, consider making a donation today to the Alaska Quarterly Review so we can continue to bring you poets like the ones that you heard today, whose voices are boy, more important now than ever. And as always, Ron, the last word is yours.
Well, thank you, Heather. And Michelle, Amber, and Marie, what an honor to have you today. And we're very grateful to you for taking the time and sharing your beautiful work with us, both in our pages and through the internet. And we hope to be continuing our conversations with you. Thank you, Heather, again, for putting aside the time on a wonderful Friday for us. And one other thing, I think I want to show you, if if I can, our new issue that was delayed 3 months. Incredibly, I don't know why it was delayed 3 months, but it was delayed 3 months because of COVID. And the printer, they didn't have the paper, they didn't have what they needed. So, yep, it's coming. And one final note, 2 events on Friday in December. December 10, we have a fiction reading with Emily Mitchell, Matthew Landsberg, and Elizabeth Sticks, which should be fabulous. And December 17th, a poetry event leading up to the holidays for everyone. Amazing event, Todd Boss, Kiji Kuipers, and Marie Seaton. So it's going to be fabulous. Thank you again. Thank you, Heather, Michelle, Amber, and Marie. And bye, everybody.